Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. Today I'm going to do not quite a reading vlog, but I am going to sample a bunch of books over the course of this video. These are all review copies or advanced review copies that I've received from the authors recently. So a week or so ago, I reviewed and refreshed my Goodreads want to read list. I got rid of basically all of the titles that were on there and just updated it with review copies that I've received as a way of me keeping track of the review copies that I have to read, but also to highlight them to people who follow me on Goodreads. So when I did that, I put up a little image on Twitter showcasing some of the recent review copies I've put on that list, and it gained quite a bit of interest. So because it might take me a little while to get to all of these books, I thought I would do one of my first chapter reads videos specifically focusing on these review copies. Some of these have been released and indeed had already been released before they were sent to me. Some of them are upcoming titles for you to look out for. So the 6 titles I've got in this list are Dreams of Dust by Lily Ann Crow. This one's scheduled to be published on May 14th, which, if everything goes well, should be the day before this video comes out. Then I've got Death's Disciple by Emma L. Adams. This one comes out on May 30th. The Ruptured Sky by Jessica A. McMinn. This one's already been released. It came out on April the 4th. Seeds of War by Joelle F. Silver. This one came out on May the 1st, so just over a week ago. The oldest book on the list is Renia by Carl Forshaw, which for me came in this beautiful presentation box. This one came out on March 21st, and when I opened the box, this is what was inside it. And then the final title is The Beauty of Dawn by W.D. Seitz, which comes out on June 23rd. So as chosen by Marilyn in my Discord server, I read the first chapter last night of Dreams of Dust, so via the magic of editing I'll talk to you about that one in a moment. In the meantime, I'm going to put my feet up and read the opening of Death's Disciple with a nice cup of tea. Cheers. So yes, the first book that I picked up to sample was Will of the Wayfinder Book 1. This is Dreams of Dust by Lily Ann Crow. And the opening of this one didn't really pull me in straight away. I'll read the opening sentence or paragraph as applicable for each of these titles. But yeah, this one didn't really suck me in. Thaniel turned the key. This was the day, the incredible day of his first job, his first experience out in the wide world beyond the city walls. He gave the door of his home, his father's home, one last nod, tucked the big silver key with its fine silver chain into his pocket, and set off down the street, his grin widening with every step. So yeah, that one gives me the impression of something very mundane. He seems to be quite well off. He's got the family home there and the key on the silver chain. And it does sound to me like maybe he's going off to work in the city. He's going to work in a shop or a bank or something along those lines. That, however, is definitely not the case. So Thaniel is a wayfinder, he's a cartographer, and he's going out of the city on a mission to, well, I don't know what at this point, to explore, to create maps as a cartographer would. So once we find out this information, the rest of the chapter then details him going out of the city and towards whatever their destination is. And although it's quite a pedestrian kind of opening, it does give us some nice little details about the world this book is set in. First of all, we've got the steeds that Thaniel and his companion are riding on, the mysterious fox-like Shadowin, and these sound really interesting to me. They're quite rare. People tend to ride horses by the sound of it, but these beasts are also beasts of burden, and they're described as being quite big. They're about 10 feet from head to tail, but only coming up to sort of waist height, and you can ride on their shoulders rather than their back because of the way that they are made, essentially. Then we've got Thaniel's companion himself, who turns out to be a crystal mage, or a practicant as is the correct terminology. So we get introduced to a little bit of the magic. There's no real explanation of it, but it's a very kind of low-key introduction to the magic. It doesn't really need explanation at this point. We've got everything that we need, knowing that this is something that's probably going to be expanded on later on in the book. So I think it's pretty good overall. We get a bit of an idea of the world, some of the geography, place names and so forth. We're introduced to our presumably main character, and we've got an introduction to both the magic and some of the fantastic beasts in this world. I quite liked the opening chapter overall. It's definitely a good setup for the book, and it's one that beyond that first paragraph the rest of the chapter did a really good job at drawing my interest, so I'm quite excited to continue with this one and see where it goes. So the second of these review copies I read is the opening to Death's Disciple by Emma L. Adams, and this one was quite an interesting one. We don't really get too much detail. It's a prologue rather than an actual first chapter that I opened this book with, but that doesn't matter. It's still setting the scene for the book. We're still introduced to our main character, and as I said, I'll read the opening of the prologue in this case as well. Yarla watched the king's funeral pyre burn, the light of the dancing flames reflected in her fellow soldiers' eyes. A cascade of grey smoke billowed from the courtyard, disappearing into the sky. So it's a very atmospheric opening, and I think that continues throughout the first chapter, or the prologue rather. It tells us a little bit about what's just happened. So there's been a mission. Yarla is the captain of a group of Drake riders, war Drake riders, and they've gone out to secure a location, an island in this war. Things didn't go to plan. The island was destroyed. She's lost one of her squad and they've returned, and I presume it was while they were away. The king has been assassinated by agents of the enemy. So they're there at the king's funeral pyre. His young son, I think is about 16, 17 or so, has taken on the mantle. He's going to be crowned king very soon, and he's come to the decision that he's going to make some changes. He's not one for war. He's not an aggressor like he describes his father. He's going to make these changes, and the first of those changes is to disband the flight division. So there are hundreds of these riders of war drakes. It must cost quite a bit of money, Yarla notes, to raise and feed these beasts. We don't actually see the war drakes themselves in this opening, but we hear a little bit about them. And they're going to be disbanded. So people like her, they're going to be essentially no longer employed by the military. She's limping, she's got a leg injury, she's walking at the time of this prologue with the use of a cane, and she's not going to be able to continue basically. She's no good as a foot soldier. She's going to be paid off basically and put into retirement. So she's obviously not happy with that. She knows that various of her team are not going to be happy with that. She ends the prologue by telling them basically there's some good news and there's some bad news for all of us. So I know the book itself is set sort of 7 years or so after this prologue. I'm very interested to continue with it and see where it goes. It definitely sounds interesting from what I remember reading of the synopsis, and the writing style and the character, the setting did definitely intrigue me. So this is another one that I think did a really good job in opening the book. So the third review copy that I've read the opening chapter for is Renia by Cole Forshaw. This one is a little bit of a strange one. I'm not entirely sure on the kind of overall setting of it. It's listed as fantasy, but I don't know how much kind of science fiction is in there. A science fantasy might be a better explanation. I don't know. We have things like a coffee machine, for instance, and certainly some of the setting, most of the first chapter taking place in a library. It does kind of sound like it's more of a modern kind of setting, but I'm not entirely sure yet because it's only a chapter in. Now with this one, there was an introductory section titled 12 Years Ago, but it was only a couple of pages, so I read that first and then carried on to the first chapter, where we're introduced to our title character, Renia. The opening of chapter 1 says, "The pile of books landed with a thud, far too close for her face to be considered polite. A wave of dust assaulted her nostrils. She winced, coughed, and then tried her best to suppress the grin pulling at her cheeks. Dust is good. Dust means old, forgotten, or better yet, forbidden." So this young lady is working in essentially a library, and she's copying books. There's a group of people that she works with who, by the sounds of it, take books, copy them, send them off for binding. So not an unknown occupation. The opening that was 12 years apart is a very different setting. It's taking place on the roof of a tall building by the sounds of things, or a balcony perhaps. And there's a confrontation between a reaper or assassin and another man, and there's a dead woman there as well who's referred to, and the assassin is under the impression that he's won, he's got what he came for, he's got a book, and the man before him is saying, "No, you've fallen into our trap, it was a decoy, it's not actually the journal, have a look through it." And the reaper does so, and then basically is howling in rage because he's not got the actual journal that he was looking for. So there's no real word on this journal, what it is, why it's significant, or anything along those lines. The man is then kicked from a great height, 300 style, and basically the opening kind of prologue, almost preface to the book, ends mid-word as presumably he hits the floor. The opening chapter itself then, dealing with Renia and these books, is basically about her taking some books. She's had permission, she's listed as having a mysterious benefactor, to allow her to get 3 books from the forbidden section, essentially. The master who provides these books is essentially jealous of her. He doesn't know why she has received these books, who has granted the permission, because he's very high up. There are very few people who outrank him, so he feels like he should know what's going on and would be able to maybe veto this decision, perhaps. One of the books that Renia has been provided is listed as a journal, and the name of the author of this journal does ring a bell from that opening preface. It's the book that the Reaper thought that he had but actually didn't have. And at some point within this chapter, the master who provides the books does think words to the effect of the journal nearly killed him or nearly cost him his career or something like that 12 years ago. So it is definitely relating to the same journal. So we don't know what these books are. We just know that Renia is very, very excited. She can barely contain her excitement while she finishes up a previous job before moving on to looking at these 3 books. The master doesn't want her to have those. There's not really a lot to go on with regards to the world, but one interesting aspect that was mentioned is a moonfall, essentially. So we've got this irradiated crater where a moon fell, so that's very interesting. There's light stones which are related to this as well, so that suggests some degree of magic in this world. So it's very interesting. It's a very different setting. As I say, the coffee machine and mugs of coffee and things like that do present more of a modern kind of our world setting, but there are obviously fantasy and fantastical elements in there as well. Next up, I went for The Ruptured Sky by Jessica A. McMinn. This one is book 1 in the Gardens of War and Wasteland, and it's quite a short opening. It's a prologue rather than a first chapter, and it starts with "We're going to get caught." Amica turned back to her brother. Keo had stopped, arms folded and a disapproving scowl on his face. Amica glanced around the deserted markets. The streets of Adria were so quiet at this late hour that not even guards bothered to patrol here. She raised an eyebrow at her strangely cautious brother. So doesn't really tell us much. It suggests that we've got some quite young, maybe teenage protagonists here for this prologue, and they're doing something that they're not supposed to be doing. The reason for that becomes apparent in the next couple of paragraphs. Amica and Keo are brother and sister, and they are royal siblings. They've got a little group with them. They've got someone who's obviously kind of the ringleader, if you like, taking them out on these nighttime trysts. Is something that happens every so often from the sounds of things. And there's a couple of others as well, including Keo's not betrothed, but potentially soon to be betrothed. They're going out to see not quite a once in a lifetime event, but it's every 20 or so years you get the opportunity to see this, and it's essentially a comet passing above, and there's 2 places that they say that you can see this, and they are at one of those places. So they go out, they're outside the city walls, which is a rarity. Their nighttime trysts are normally contained within the city, and they're waiting, basically lying back on the grass, looking at the stars above, and then this comet comes out. They're then attacked by a boar type creature. It's not fully detailed, we don't really see much of it. We're told that it has mist coming from its nostrils, it's got tusks, and it charges at them and separates Amica from the group. It's about to charge at her specifically. She raises her hand to try and stop it, and there's the hint of some magic here because this beast essentially explodes, and there's blood and entrails all over the place. There's also ink mentioned as being pretty much all over the place as well. I'm not sure whether that's kind of an inky substance, potentially blood or something else, or whether it is literally ink. But we've got this magic there. None of them know what happened. They ask the question of Amica and she puts words to that, and it's clear though to the reader that she has some sort of magic, or that there's somebody else, potentially not seen by this group, who has some sort of magic and was able to stop this attack. So it's an interesting opening. The writing style is pretty good. It's very easy to go through. We do get, in a quite short prologue, a fair few names. There's a couple of places and things like that mentioned as well. So there's a bit of jargon, so to speak, within this opening, but that's all okay. It flows pretty easily, and as I say, the writing style itself is quite good, and there's that intrigue there, especially with the magic and who's responsible for the magic at the end of the prologue. Next on my list was Seeds of War. This is one that I've heard a lot about. A lot of friends have read this already and really been raving about it, so I'm very excited to read it. It opens with a chapter called Visitors, and there's an epigraph to start us off with as well, which says, "Please have mercy, I cannot recall, my memories fade and I am nothing but weak. Old things haunt my dreams," and that's taken from Mother's Memories. The chapter itself starts, by the time she was 10, Gimlaw had already lost her parents to the war, escaped the king's smokesmiths, and learned to survive. Selling a product nobody else had should be easy by comparison. And then we go through the chapter and it seems like it's a deal basically that is being propositioned rather than specifically taken place. So Gimlaw has got a little group around her. They are pretty rough by comparison to the visitors that they're having, who turn up in their fineries on these magnificent steeds, and there's mud all around, which they're obviously not used to, or at least not used to being in quite close proximity to. In their introductions, Gimlaw describes themselves as being a little bit rougher than most. She says that the people around her are from various places, but largely they are refugees from this war, the Crimson War I think it was called, and they are farmers. They are producing things from the land. The people who have come to visit are from a different land. There's a translator with them, so they speak through him, and they're there for an elixir. So they wash up, they have a meal, and then they go out to have a look at the farmlands. They're a little bit confused because obviously they're looking for something that they're not seeing, and they're not expecting what they are seeing, which turns out to be the farmlands, but it's not what we would necessarily think of as such. They are pretty much swamplands instead. So Gimlaw has a dead mouse, and she uses it to attract these beasts and says that these are the things that they farm basically. They use their fur for clothing, they eat them, and of course there's this elixir which she keeps secret from them, extracted from their liver. And they already know, these merchants know about the elixir, it is what they're there for, and Gimlaw is saying to herself in a mind that she's obviously jacking up the price for them to make a nice little profit. There's a demonstration then of the elixir. One of her men had some before because it takes a little while to kick in, and it imbues him with great strength basically. He's able to pick up and throw a big boulder, smash a big hole in a tree, and it says that they have increased power, strength and healing from using this elixir, so obviously people are going to want their armies to have access to this stuff. The thing that I thought quite interesting about this, bearing in mind that we don't see too much of a world, it's very much a different world, kind of an alien world, but one of the things that does come up to show how different it is all of these different beasts. We have 3, maybe 4 different beasts either named or described within this opening chapter, and I did like that at the start of the book. In between the map and the opening chapter itself, there's a little bestiary. There's no description in it, it's just some illustrations of these beasts and their names. So straight away when they're mentioned, although they are described in the chapter, you've also got a visual representation of them that you can refer to. And then the final one of my review copies is The Beauty of Dawn, which opens with a chapter called Emmet's Oath. In the plains of Arden there was a small farmhouse cross-hatched with brick, nestled in a thicket of dead garden plants. Smoke plumed from the chimney, spiralling up into a blackened sky. The bottom step of the front door had collapsed and the windowsills had splintered dangerously. It's a bit of an atmospheric opening. It's trying to obviously describe this place, and it goes on actually within that opening page to talk about a smell, and it's the stench of a world dying. It was an eternal decay. So it's a very atmospheric opening in terms of how it's trying to portray this world. It goes on to talk about it being a very dark time. The Dark Ages are mentioned. You've got Shadows of Twilight, which are these wraiths that attack towns, and the main character whose point of view we're in is a soldier called Aldrich, and this is his family home. It tells us a bit about him and the type of person he is. He's a soldier, everything needs to be spotless, he's very disciplined. He commutes to a place of faith where he trains, and then he comes home and he's got a wife and a child there. the Emmett of the chapter's title, and he's a little bit kind of disappointed, it seems, in Emmett. He's quite a scrawny child. I'm not sure how old he is, but he does seem quite young, and he's saying that he's not old enough to wear armour, and it's going to be a few years before Emmett can become a knight. But he wants Emmett to follow in his footsteps as his father and grandfather and many generations before did, and become a soldier and protect the family and protect the people around them. It talks a little bit about water being quite scarce, or at least for this family, because they have specified bath days and they have to heat the water in a kettle, and then there's a small, quite a shallow bath that they then have. And it describes, although the house itself is quite pristine, it describes the people in it, his wife and his child in particular, as being quite grubby, a dirty dress, dirt on the face and so forth. And also Emmett is quite, with his gangliness, he's quite error prone. I think he often trips and falls and things like that. So that kind of paints a picture of the family and the family dynamic. Aldrich then takes a pendant from around his neck. It's the family crest. He says that the generations of soldiers in the family would wear this crest on their breastplate. Because Emmett is too young and too small to have armour and a breastplate with this crest on, it's been made into a pendant for him, and he says basically that he will honour the pendant and what it stands for. So it's quite a good opening. It's a very different one in terms of what we get in it. It's more descriptive in terms of the world and the setting rather than kind of what's going on within it. It doesn't really tell us too much about that part of things, but it's well written, it flows nicely. It's definitely one that interests me to find out more, particularly about things like these shadows of twilight, and are there other people like Aldrich? It does mention that he's got various plaques on the wall for every time that he's killed one of these and saved a town or a village or whatever. So yeah, very interesting opening, and I'm looking forward to reading more. So there we have 6 review copies or advanced review copies that I've received recently, and from reading the opening chapters of them, I'm interested in all of these, which is great of course, because I've accepted these because they sounded good in premise. Now, although all of the books are very different, they are all intriguing in their own way. I like that the interest is drawn and kept throughout the opening chapter in each of these books, and there's none of them that really turned me off, although perhaps Renia doesn't necessarily sound like my normal kind of setting, the normal setting that I would enjoy. It does sound like it's interesting, and the kind of preface to the opening chapter, the 12 years earlier, definitely drew my attention, and more so admittedly than the opening chapter itself, so I was grateful for having that there. It shows a bit more of the world and the type of story that I might be reading when I get to it. So yeah, really interested in all of these. I'm not sure when I'm going to get to them all or in what order. This video isn't one where I'm going to choose my favourite from them to read next. It's just a case of trying to highlight these books because they've just been released or are soon going to be released, and I wanted to showcase them a little bit before I get to read them. So you can look forward to hearing more about each of these on the channel in the coming months as I wrap up and maybe do dedicated reviews for each of the 6 titles. Let me know in the comments down below which one of these interested you the most, or indeed have you read any of these and what did you think of it. I'll hopefully see you in another video sometime soon, but until then, as always, take care of yourselves, read some good books. Bye for now.